Congratulations on finishing your doctoral degree, Cody.
Thank you. Yeah, it was I officially defended it June 1st. And over the past month, I've been doing a lot of road tripping, catching up with friends. And I was fortunate enough to get a postdoc position at Notre Dame, which starts this fall. So I've been, in the process of moving and signing my lease for the new apartment and all that stuff. I originally, my long COVID hit late summer of 2020. In fact, I think it was August 1st. Yeah, my guess is that I initially got the coronavirus sometime maybe early midsummer 2020, but I think initially I was almost asymptomatic. So I didn't even know I had it until a couple of weeks later. I started having some breathing problems, and I'm like, is it a chance I got the coronavirus? But then I tested, and by that point, I think I was already negative. So I'm like, maybe this isn't what it is. And like I said, you shared that article yesterday where it said there's a lot of mounting evidence that endurance athletes, people who run a lot and train a lot, that could kind of precipitate long COVID if you get an infection. And I think that's certainly what happened to me. Prior to my long COVID experience, I was extremely into running. I was running like 5 miles every day. And even as I started experiencing a little bit of the breathing problems, I was just training through it. And the morning, August 1st, 2020, when I woke up feeling just like I had the crazy fever and like I had COVID essentially, the day before I had went on a 7-mile run, like really intense run. And I felt just completely exhausted after that. So based on my own first person phenomenological experience, that the idea that training can precipitate long COVID, and especially when you initially get COVID, if you train through it and you're not, you don't take care of yourself and rest, that is absolutely true to my experience. But yeah, pretty much.
So Cody, let me add something to that.
Yeah,
I see that over and over again, where especially among the younger, real active athletic people like you that were doing a lot of exercise are overrepresented. It seems to be something about strenuous exercise that actually triggers can trigger a major burst of viral replication.
Yeah.
And throw people into the long COVID nightmare.
It certainly seems like that. At first, so this is the summer of 2020. So at the time, there wasn't really anything about long COVID. I certainly hadn't heard about long COVID at that point. And I mean, really the PR from all the health officials at that point that I was hearing from, at least, was if you're young, you're not really as much at risk. If you're young and you're healthy, you're not immunocompromised, it's probably going to be nothing more than a terrible flu. So at first I thought it could be COVID. When I woke up August 1st, I immediately went and got the test, negative. In retrospect, now I realize, well, you weren't infectious anymore. It was long COVID, right? Like the infectious period had probably ended. But I'm like, oh, well, maybe I didn't know long COVID was a thing. So I'm like, maybe it's not COVID. Went to all the doctors. All my vitals came back good. Blood came back good. They're like, you're healthy. I thought it could be Lyme's disease because I run a lot and I'm on the Northeast here in Connecticut. So they said, yeah, it's possible it's Lyme's disease. I did the test for that, but they said sometimes it doesn't like show up in the blood for a while. So they put me on Lyme's disease medication for like a month and a half, maybe 2 months. And yeah, that just didn't help or make things better. So it was, and I should also say the main symptoms that I had were the fatigue. Chronic fatigue was the main one, and brain fog and breathing problems. And also right at the beginning, trouble swallowing. And the other thing about it is, and I'm sure as a lot of long haulers know, is the kind of wavy, sporadic nature of it, which just made it that much more psychologically hard to deal with. Because, I'd have a few days where like I'd start like I'm feeling better. I'm like, oh, I'm getting over it. Then another day where I'd have a relapse, where the chronic fatigue would just be overwhelming. And then also the breathing would start up too. I'd have these like fits where I suddenly like had trouble breathing, and I had to very carefully eat my food so I could swallow and like stand like this. And sometimes those exacerbations would like be very intense, but short, like they would last like, 5 to 10 minutes and then like get a little better. So I'm like, what is going? So I kept, what I did is I started keeping like a diary, and like I was writing down things I was doing. I'm like, is there a certain something that I'm doing that's just triggering these exacerbations, or is it just really random and it's just kind of like fluctuating and whatever, regardless of what I do, it's just going to rear its ugly head. The first 2 months were extremely difficult because I felt I had no idea what was going on with me, and the doctors didn't. And I even got the sense from some of them that they didn't like believe me, just because there was like no evidence and all my, all my stuff. Long COVID wasn't a known thing.
Well, naturally, like you didn't know anything about it. The doctors didn't know anything about it.
Right. Yeah.
And without any abnormal lab tests, they're at a loss, right?
Yeah. So I understood that, it's just frustrating. And it wasn't until I forget exactly when, I think it was maybe probably mid-October, something like that. Like there was a couple months there in the beginning where it was just, I did not know what was happening. I discovered these groups on social media, these COVID long hauler groups. And I started reading the testimonies of the people and their experiences, and they were uncannily similar to my own. So I remember the exact day, it was like sometime mid-October, it was very late at night, like 1 a.m. And I was just reading all these testimonies of these people, and I just clicked. I'm like, this is what's happening with me. I got long COVID. And it was like this like revelation. I was be at their house during this long COVID experience. And also, I was also fortunate enough as a grad student to be able to still make some money and teach online, which is also very helpful. But from there, that was a huge change because I was able to talk with other people about this and learn more about this and the kind of new science that people were trying to discover behind this. And at some point, I stumbled upon you and your group. Actually, it wasn't your group. It was we were in like some group together, and you had posted something.
Oh, yeah. So I was relatively slow to get into social media, ironically. But when I did, I was in one of the other Facebook groups. I think it was Long COVID Support. And I was having some success improving my symptoms with periodic, which I believed was periodic autophagy. I can't prove that autophagy is happening since no one can measure that in living, breathing human beings. But with water fasting and resveratrol and other things, I was seeing some improvements, and I was like starting to talk about it on this other Facebook group, and it was upsetting a percentage of the people, especially when they were like, well, you're suggesting that sick people water fast, like that can't be good. Like, who are you? And I was getting, from a small percentage of people, I was getting big pushback.
The long COVID social media groups were extremely helpful and comforting to me because they validated my own experience. I was able to see that some people even seem to have it like a lot worse than me, and symptoms that I didn't have, right? Like I never lost my sense of smell. I never got the ringing in the ears, the tinnitus. But at a certain point on some of these social media groups, there was so much catastrophizing that the more time I would spend on these groups, it would kind of like psychologically not be healthy for me, because I just felt it was almost like this sense of hopelessness, because I understood it was healthy for some people to do because they need a place to vent, and I think it's important to have places like that for people. And that's fine. But for me personally, just being in these groups and like just being surrounded by all like the catastrophizing and quasi hopelessness all the time, it was not good for my mental health. So one thing I really appreciated about you and the group that you started is that it was very much focused on solutions, right? And you made that clear. You said, hey, I want the goal of this group to be, let's focus on solutions. Let's gather data as a group and try to like, not have the focus be like venting and catastrophizing. There are other groups for that.
Yeah. So I started my group, I think December 5th, 2020. I basically been kicked off this other group for my controversial ideas. And so I started this other group, and I said, hey, I was trying to be upfront. I said, hey, this is experimental. None of this is proven, like, this is what I've done, and I've seen a significant improvement in symptoms. It's like, hey, nobody knows how to treat this.
I should say I was never hospitalized for long COVID. There was a couple of times where I almost called an ambulance. There's one night in my apartment where like one of those breathing flare-ups happened. And there was another point, sometime late fall 2020, I was in my parents' house, and I hadn't had an experience like this where I know that some people who have long COVID have like gastronomical issues, like, what's the right word? Like stomach issues. And
Yeah, GI issues. Yeah.
right. That wasn't a consistent symptom for me, but there was this one extremely powerful flare up that happened like late fall 2020, where I had like those GI issues. And I don't think they were related to any food I had eaten. It felt like it was a part of the exacerbation of the long COVID. And then my body got like extremely hot and I suddenly had a lot of trouble breathing. And there was a second where like I couldn't even make it downstairs and I thought I was dying. Like I thought like whatever happens, like because it was like all these intense symptoms like flaring up at once and I had no idea what was happening. I had no control over it. And I didn't even have enough like energy to like call down to my parents who were in the kitchen. So, and I was like so hot. So I stripped off all my clothes and I was like naked. And I found a way to finally like make it down to the kitchen. And they're like, oh my God, like what's wrong with you? And then my body got like really cold all of a sudden. And it probably lasted like 10 minutes, but it was like probably the the 10 most like scary minutes of the whole long COVID experience because I had all these symptoms that I hadn't normally had. Like again, my main symptoms were what I was mainly worried about as someone who's like into philosophy and academia was the brain fog and chronic fatigue. I thought that I was going to have chronic fatigue syndrome for the rest of my life. And that was terrifying and the brain fog, because it felt like my life force was just drained, and like I couldn't
Right.
understand that. And I couldn't think. Like I actually couldn't, I didn't, there's parts of my brain and like my reasoning that I didn't even think could like malfunction. And I'm like, those are my main symptoms, but I'm just, I highlight this one incident because it does stand out in memory and it was strange. And I would wonder whether any long haulers I'm sure they had.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So I mean, the hot and cold sensations, that's part of the dysautonomia. So I mean, it's very likely that there's persistent low-level viral infection. There can be bursts of viral replication, and there can be other things where all of a sudden your immune system just gets after it, and when it goes after it, people get flares of symptoms. Sometimes one or two symptoms, sometimes all their symptoms.
Right.
And I think most people feel like they're sick and that like they just have a viral infection, and it's really, really weird compared to the flu or anything, or EBV or anything else they've experienced before.
It's the random sporadic nature of it, and also just the pantheon of symptoms, like you say, which makes it so like unique compared to anything else I've experienced.
Add every viral illness together in the world, well, then you come pretty close to approximating someone with long COVID.
It is, and I was angry at first, but I guess I just like it was unfair. Like it was unfair to expect there to be more information about this because it was a novel virus. But like everyone that I knew who was my age who would get it had nothing compared to what I went through. And I had trouble kind of like explaining to people what this was and how if you're young, this actually can be extremely, extremely debilitating for your quality of life. Let me put it this way. I've never been a person prone to like depression really whatsoever, but during this period I would say, I don't know if that would be the clinically correct word to use, but I was definitely something nearing like depression just because of, moments of hopelessness where I didn't think I thought I would be like, just have chronic fatigue to not be able to like, again, it's like your life force is drained and like your will to and ability just to do things, but
and it can be your ability to do simple things like take a regular shower. A lot of long haulers, maybe they were in the habit of taking a shower every day, but then they cut it back to maybe, once or twice a week because it's like that's too much work. That's a big effort.
I'm sure we'll get to this, but one of like the positive reverberating effects of my long haul experience is obviously just a new sense of gratitude. The concept that I use is luxury suffering. The seemingly trivial things that I would be preoccupied with and stressing over prior to long haul, which just seemed utterly trivial when your health is at risk. You know what I mean? So all I wanted, like, I remember I'm just like, all of my like career aspirations, none of that matters. Like I just want my health back. That's all I want, and to be able to have gotten that, like, it is this wave of gratitude that I still feel, just every day that I feel healthy and not fatigued
Yeah, I mean, you literally have a second chance at life.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, you know? And again, like then when you're healthy again and you go through like the normal, um, day in and day out stresses of life, it's easier to deal with. Maybe that like as I get farther and farther from the long haul experience, like the gratitude will fade, but I hope not. It hasn't yet. It's certainly been like a lasting effect.
Yeah, I would say that's probably true for anyone that goes through, an extreme hardship.
Yep.
Hopefully it changes their perspective for life.
Yeah, and I don't want to overly victimize myself. I recognize that there are people, many, obviously, millions of people who have died from COVID, and that even within the long haul community, there are certainly people who have had it worse than me, and who have had, more severe symptoms and longer duration. So, yeah, I recognize that. I don't want to like overly victimize.
You're not, you're acknowledging that. The thing I'm excited about, Cody, is that you're one of the rare people that has had a full recovery and a durable
Yep.
recovery.
Yep.
And so
I can
the,
say that
the
now.
reason I wanted to record this is just to give the long haulers, hope
Yep.
that, hey, it is possible that, under the right circumstances, your body can win the war against this
It can.
SARS-CoV-2 virus.
I guess maybe what I'll do is I'll just talk about some things that I started to do, which I don't know whether they contribute, scientifically, whether they contributed to my recovery, but I have a good idea. A lot of the things that I started doing were your recommendations. I started doing intermittent fasting, right? I was a weed smoker.
So what was your eating window, daily eating window?
Yeah, so like an 8 hour eating window, and then 16 hours
I mean,
non-eating.
like from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or something like that.
Morning and like late lunch snack.
Oh, so
Um,
so so really just like 2 meals a day?
Yeah, 2 meals a day. And
Oh, okay.
honestly, I only like that's been like a permanent change. Like I'm not like intermittent fasting as like meticulously, but I still
Right.
only like eat 2 meals a day usually.
But that's your new routine. Yeah, cool.
Right.
And how about the cutting out sugars and things like that?
Yes, I cut out pretty much all sugar, all junk food. I stopped drinking alcohol completely. I wasn't like a huge drinker of alcohol. Probably, have like a beer at the end of the day, or which obviously I stopped smoking weed completely as well. So yeah, cut out all sugar, pretty much all. As I learned and talked more with long haulers like yourself, I learned about particular things that there was good reason to believe were bad for long haul, right? Like histamines is something people talk about a lot. Anything that causes inflammation or induces oxidative stress. Yeah, I really cut out.
And that's where alcohol fits in, and as well as exercise. They both induce cellular oxidative stress.
Right, right.
Did
Yeah.
you notice that you felt worse after you would have a beer or something?
Yeah, during so I cut out alcohol pretty quick. Like during the beginning in August, there's definitely like a night or something when I had a beer, and now like reflecting upon it, I can see how it made it worse. But that was one of the things, because like I wasn't a huge drinker. So that was one of the things where I'm like, all right, this is out. It
It
wasn't
just
that
just
hard for me.
that's just one of your first steps to get healthier.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, whatever this is, alcohol is not helping it. So let's get
Right.
it out.
Right.
Um, and then the same thing with smoking weed for obvious reasons with the breathing, and I don't
And you
smoke in my
smoke.
lungs.
Yeah. Actually, smoke can cause a lot of stress. Any type of smoke, even from wildfires.
Became like obsessed with was blueberries. I ate tons of blueberries all the time. Also salmon and blueberries and Brussels sprouts. That was like my main meal. I just would cook salmon. I remember I go to the grocery store and I'd buy like so much salmon. And one time the people asked me, they're like, "Is there a reason you're buying all this salmon?" It was just like it was a food that I liked and I felt was healthy.
Well, I
For my
mean, it is
reason.
healthy. One of the main things about salmon and other fatty fishes like that is that it has omega-3 fatty acids in them, and
Yeah.
those are generally considered very beneficial for cardiovascular health.
Right.
And I believe the omega-3s also induce the cellular house cleaning of autophagy.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, because if you eat a lot of salmon, or take the supplements, omega-3s actually throw the lipids out of balance in your cells. And there's a special type of autophagy triggered, I believe, called lipophagy, and it degrades the lipid droplets, which are a fuel source in your cells.
Mm.
So that's very interesting. I didn't know that you were eating a lot of salmon.
Mm-hmm. And also, and I think this is probably an important piece of it as well, but prior to long COVID, I was a person who didn't really take any vitamins whatsoever. When I initially got some of my like vitamin levels checked during the beginning of this, it was shown that I was pretty vitamin D deficient. One thing the doctor did is they put me on a couple month regimen of like very high vitamin D dosage. So it was like a pill I would take once a week, but it was much, much more vitamin D than the typical vitamin D supplement you would buy at your CVS.
Okay, so sometimes, you know, when people are supplementing with vitamin D, it's typically 2,000 or 3,000 international units, sometimes as high as 5,000. But sometimes some people do these mega doses of vitamin D that can be 10,000, 20,000, or even 50,000 units.
I feel like 20 sounds right, but okay. I forget precisely.
And that's very interesting because I've tried a zillion different supplements to see if they trigger autophagy, which I measure, you know, by my temporary increase in long COVID symptoms. Well, when I took, I think I took 20,000 units of vitamin D, and I got a flare up of my symptoms. So that's very interesting. You've been doing the salmon for the omega-3s, and you once a week, at least initially, you were taking the high dose vitamin D
for like 3 months. For 3 months.
Oh, for 3 months! Wow.
Yeah. I think that's how much he prescribed it. It was honestly, I got like really like crazy with it. Like I still have this huge bin of vitamins that I never use because I was like, you know, obsessively on Reddit, and like any testimony from a like fellow long hauler who said like this vitamin worked for them, I would just frantically buy it on Amazon, you know? So
yeah. The supplement companies must be doing a record business.
Yeah, exactly. So I was just trying to buy anything that I could that would work. But a lot of the ones that I really ended up taking consistently are the ones that I think you recommend and that others recommend. So just to list some off, D, C, zinc, quercetin, NAC. NAC is one that I took for at least like a year consistently. Vitamin B3, niacin. Yeah, so that one, I've actually grown quite fond of the flushing reaction. Weirdly, it's almost like refreshing in a way. But you know, then a multivitamin. So I've become, that's definitely another permanent change. I'm now just you know, I don't necessarily take NAC and quercetin every day anymore. Oh, sorry, another one I should mention is CoQ10. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, for mitochondrial support.
This is one I take a lot. It has CoQ10, alpha lipoic acid, and L-carnitine.
Right. And those three are mitochondrial support. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that one, I was in a lot of like, you know, chronic fatigue social media groups, and people talk a lot about that mitochondria support things to help with that. So yeah, the vitamins. And what's crazy is I wasn't like a really heavy person. I was like 220 probably going into long COVID. Within the span of a month, I lost 50 pounds after doing this change. I went from 220 to 170. And at my lightest, I was actually like 167, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I was very, very skinny, 6'5", 167. I didn't realize you could lose weight that quickly. I'm like, oh, if you really just radically change your diet and like cut out all of this stuff, you just lose weight.
Well, like, you know, yeah, and it's hard to sort out, you know, how much of that was due to your changing your supplements or changing your diet, because there's a percentage of long haulers that they either gain weight or they lose weight. And I've talked to a number of people that have lost a huge percentage of their body weight in just 1 week. The first time someone told me about this, I was in disbelief. I'm like, that's not possible. But it turns out if you have high enough level of the cortisol stress hormone in your body, you can lose an unbelievable amount of weight in in just 1 or 2 weeks.
But yeah, my family was pretty concerned actually, because it happened pretty quick, and I was already not like fat or obese or anything like that. They were concerned about it for a while just because it was like pretty skinny. I'm gained more weight back, like in the
Do
180.
you have any idea what your BMI was?
So I guess I was like just within still the normal weight.
Yeah. So that's the low end of healthy, but not
Yeah.
medically considered underweight.
I'm trying to think about, the other thing, this is an obvious one, but I just became the only thing, I cut out all drinks except water and sugar-free Gatorade and water mixed in with like natural electrolyte stuff. So I also became obsessed with just being hydrated all the time, and just having electrolytes in my system all the time. And that's also been, permanent change, which is good. So yeah, I mean, I was extremely hopeless in the fall of 2020. Like I really didn't think, there's times when I really didn't think I would recover, just because I know how psychologically daunting it can be, especially with like the seeming sporadic nature of it. But for me, so I would say the worst of it, the most intense part of it for me was probably between August 2020 and December 2020. That was when I was having like the full symptoms, and I was just pretty much completely debilitated, was having trouble just, didn't make any gains in my dissertation or philosophical research. I was really just.
So Cody, at that time, did you have insomnia?
No.
Okay, that's one of the common symptoms, and depression and anxiety.
Certainly depression and anxiety, just because of the unknown factor of it. And
it's unclear, if both those are, due to being the nature of the sickness, or I believe that the virus is actually directly causing those symptoms in a lot of long haulers. It's affecting so many things. It can affect definitely major aspects of our normal brain function.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying. I think the point I was saying, like, I was depressed because of the thought patterns I was having, and like the hopelessness and the possibility that I could have lifelong chronic fatigue and I would be permanently disabled. And you're saying, well, yeah, there's that, but also in a more direct way, the virus could like be altering the chemicals of, I don't know.
Yeah, almost certainly it could. It now looks like the virus is capable of co-opting our cells. It's like pirates invading a ship and taking over control of the ship, and they use it for their own purposes. So normal cellular functions and metabolism are altered, and instead it's concentrating on producing more virions whenever it feels like. So it throws off levels of neurotransmitters. It changes, inflammation. It changes. It can change hormones. It can change the fatty acid lipid metabolism. It basically hijacks our cells, and it's unbelievable the number of changes that can happen.
Yeah, it does. It's like I was like a different person. And then of course, like there's the normal stuff where anyone who's sick.
What was the symptom that bothered you, or the symptoms that bothered you the very most at that time?
The scariest one is probably having trouble breathing and swallowing, because when I was experiencing that, it felt like death was on the other side of the door. So yeah, I would say the scariest symptoms were the trouble swallowing and the trouble breathing, just because you felt, the moment you start to have trouble breathing, you immediately notice it and you're like, whoa. And it's scary because it feels like you're extremely vulnerable and things can get bad.
And did you use a pulse oximeter to measure your oxygen saturation?
No, but I remember looking into that. I remember doing research on that. I never ended up doing that.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah, but I would say the one that was the scariest symptom, but the one that was really the most challenging for me to deal with was the brain fog and the chronic fatigue, because that was the most persistent. That was the one that I was really dealing with on a day in, day out basis. The breathing, the swallowing thing really was mostly August and September. The breathing then would kind of come kind of like randomly and sporadically. It wasn't as persistent as the brain fog and the fatigue. And that was challenging for the reasons we've discussed. Like you feel like you're actually literally losing your mind, and like, you know, every yeah, like all of my smarts were just like being drained from me or something.
Yeah, and this brain fog, I agree, is just one of the nastiest long COVID symptoms.
It's hard to describe to people
Because
too.
people that don't experience it
Yeah,
really have no clue what it is, what it
right.
feels like, what it does to you. There's no question. It's the scariest thing. I mean, I think it's, inflammation of the blood-brain barrier. It's not quite a headache, but it's like a kind of a fuzzy, diffuse feeling, and I think of it as just like, well, this has got to be inflammation of, at least on the surface of the brain, which is all convoluted. The blood-brain barrier.
Yeah, honestly, there's this concept in feminist philosophy called standpoint epistemology, and the idea is that there's certain knowledge that individuals have privileged access to based upon their unique subjective experiences. It's a pretty simple experience or idea. And yeah, just the truth of standpoint epistemology became so clear to me in experiencing a lot of these symptoms, because it's one of those things where you can try to describe it to people using language, but if you haven't actually had the experience, and that was another one of the psychologically daunting elements of it for me. Like I'm trying to describe to people what's going on to me, and I'm trying to convey just how intense and scary it is without like trying to be overly alarming. I haven't really had an extensive history with migraines before, but I actually had a couple of migraines during my experience with long COVID after a run during the beginning. And I remember it's like someone who has a long history with migraines, they told me once, like, I wish I could. A lot of times people just think it's a headache when I tell them I get migraines, but the experience is so much different than like a normal headache. And I feel like there's a similar thing going on with the brain fog element of it. You can like kind of imagine what it's like to be brain fog, like, people don't get enough sleep and maybe they're a little hungover and they feel a little foggy. That's not what it is at all. It's a lot. It's extremely more terrifying and debilitating than what you're imagining. And it's frustrating not being able to, convey that to people.
Yeah, and it's very frustrating when if you read any article in the newspaper, and they may mention brain fog, but they do it kind of in a, they'll put it in double quotes, and they kind of say colloquially, or like they kind of dismiss it as like, this isn't really a very descriptive term. And that tells to me, well, they really don't know. It's a super descriptive term. They just have not experienced it. They don't fully appreciate what it means.
No. It can destroy your life. And yeah, that's the other thing. I felt like during the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of the people were just measuring how dangerous the pandemic was in terms of pure fatalities, right? Just like anyone who, like, however many people have died, that's how bad the pandemic is. Just completely ignoring the millions of people who have gotten long COVID and been disabled to one degree or another.
Right.
Like
and unfortunately, while certain journalistic outlets are trying to cover long COVID, like the Atlantic, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, long COVID is still on the back burner, and it needs to come to the forefront of the world's consciousness. On average, worldwide, about 20% of the people that get COVID get long COVID, and it's kind of a roll of the dice. Of course, your odds increase greatly if you go out and run or do something strenuous afterwards.
Don't run.
But there's other risk factors, and it's very mysterious who gets it and who doesn't. I mean, I think probably, in a few years, we'll figure out that there's certain genetic phenotypes that predispose some people to get it over others. But 20% is a lot. And from my surveys of long haulers, and I've done a lot of them, it's consistently 3 women for every man that has long COVID. So,
oh really? I'm not even sure I was.
Yeah. So my Facebook group, long COVID recover via autophagy / fasting,
Yeah.
It's got 12,700 members, and 76% of them are women. And
Oh, wow.
that ratio has been consistent since the very beginning.
I do remember reading about that now that you mention it. I didn't realize it was that much of a percentage of women compared to men, though.
Yeah, and not only that, but more recently in 2022, I've updated my long COVID symptom survey to measure the severity of the 25 most common symptoms.
Yeah.
And when we quantitate the severity, women are like 55% worse long COVID in terms of number and severity of symptoms than men. 3 times as many women, 50% more symptoms. It works out to at least 4.5 times the burden of long COVID compared to men, which is
Wow.
huge.
You have any idea why that is?
I have some ideas, but I must say it's kind of mysterious, because it's the same SARS-CoV-2 virus, and men are hit harder. They're more likely to be hospitalized and to die from long COVID, and yet the same virus is striking and incapacitating many, many more women than men. So I think it all has to do with differences in the immune system, and perhaps menstrual women with their monthly menstrual cycle. Maybe that's the equivalent of going for a run, where it causes some cellular oxidative stress. And I mean, a lot of women seem to have a flare at some point in their monthly cycle that makes their symptoms worse. So that could be the equivalent of going for a run and giving them a burst of viral replication. I don't know. That's my speculation.
Another thing I should say is I also was following, probably not as stringently as I could have, but pretty relatively consistently, the autophagy protocol, right? Inducing autophagy intentionally, and then letting your body recover. The main one that I was using to do that, based on your recommendation, was the resveratrol.
Resveratrol, yes.
Yeah.
Which is
yeah. So I don't. That's definitely something I did.
So you were taking that 1 or 2 consecutive days a week?
Yeah. Like probably, yeah. So it's like 2 days in a row, I think.
And were you one of the 2/3 of long haulers that get a flare up or, a slight step up in their symptoms when they take resveratrol or do a water fast?
Yeah, that's the thing. I did sometimes, I feel like, but it wasn't one of those things where every time I did it, it was extremely noticeable. I'm like, here's the flare up. Like there's be some times where I did it and like it wasn't as noticeable. Then other times it was noticeable, but then sometimes I would question myself. I'm like, wait, are you just like, is this like are you placeboing yourself to doing this?
Yeah. Well, I was just curious. I mean, not everyone feels, I mean, there's a lot of things that have to happen. There has to be some degradation of the viral particles in the cells. They have to get presented on the cell surface. And then your immune system has to be in a position to react and fight it. And when people are taking other autophagy inducers, like eating salmon or taking the alpha-lipoic acid and some of the things in the mitochondrial support, you were getting other autophagy inducers. Olive oil?
Yeah, sorry, olive oil, that's it.
Yeah, olive oil is another autophagy inducer. So there's a lot of mysteries about autophagy, especially in people. And I'm concerned is that if people take a strong autophagy inducer on a daily basis, I mean, that's stressing our cells. And at some point, our cells shut down the degradation of autophagy because they don't want to eat themselves to death. It's like it has complex regulation. So if you're doing autophagy inducers, sporadically or on a frequent basis, exactly when it's on and when it's off might be a little mysterious.
Yeah, and honestly, that's one of the things that I appreciate the most about your group, because like I said, I was kind of like just a maniac with just buying as many vitamins and putting them in my body as I could. So I think in the beginning, I probably made that mistake. I was probably taking multiple vitamins a day that were contributing towards inducing autophagy. It wasn't until I really found your group and you kind of had this nice laid out plan that made sense to me, where I started kind of regulating it more and being more meticulous about like keeping a journal and writing exactly how much I'd be doing each day. I think that's like, I can send you like the entire journal that I have, like each day. So I think that's
Cool.
very helpful to do. Just because the other thing is like everyone's, this is all generic advice, but first of all, everyone's different. Everyone has their own, body and biochemistry. Long COVID isn't one thing, as we know, right? It's everyone has different symptoms to different severities. Just because someone has some testimony based upon their experience with long COVID, it doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to go for you.
Right. You're right. There's a lot of individual variations, but I like that you were taking a journal of your symptoms. I do the same thing. In my group, I really encourage people to take my latest version of the survey, which is score your long COVID symptoms, and like do that weekly or at least monthly. It's through Google Forms, and it emails them their response, and like you can tally your score based on your symptom severities and the number of symptoms you have, and it allows you to track it over time and see, are you getting better, are you getting worse, and it quantifies it. So no matter what your symptoms are, I think it's very good to quantify them.
Absolutely. I guess going back to just the timeline, like I said, the most intensive period was probably August to December, around the beginning of the year 2021, like January 2021. That's where I think I made a noticeable change for the better in terms of the chronic fatigue letting up and the brain fog letting up a bit. So again, I got it August 1st, 2020 was the day when it like really hit. And I would say probably around like March 2021, I was starting to feel more like myself on like a daily basis. There was less relapses. The last thing to go, as I mentioned to you in our text yesterday, was the breathing stuff, right? So like the chronic fatigue and the brain fog let up. And then I would, every once in a while, I would have these flare-ups when I'd be like walking of like the breathing stuff, where I'd have trouble breathing. So that lasted periodically throughout 2021, but I was able to live my life from like March 2021 on. I was able to live my life relatively normally again and start to be like myself again. But I knew I wasn't like, at that point, I knew I wasn't completely healed, but I kind of like was okay with it, because I'm like, you know what? If I can just not be chronic fatigued and have brain fog, and every once in a while I have breathing issues, I can live with that. And so that would happen but it became less and less frequent kind of throughout. The last like flare up with the breathing problem that I had was this past February.
Wow.
And then since then, nothing, completely healed. And like I said, the majority of 2021 from March on, I was mostly myself, with the exception of these like, whatever this lingering breathing stuff was that would flare up. Another thing.
So the fact that you had a flare of your breathing in February suggests that this virus can linger in our bodies at a low level for a long time.
It definitely can. Because and that's part of the psychological, what's hard about this psychologically, or what was hard about it for me, is because when you think you're recovered, and then you'll have another flare up, maybe even like a month later. And there's this temptation to like go back to square one. You're like, oh, I'm back to square one. Whereas in reality, no, maybe like you're on the path to recovery, but it's just kind of, getting lesser and lesser and lesser.
I mean, a lot of people describe their long COVID as kind of being on a roller coaster, because it's not, you're lucky if your symptoms are linear, but most people it's up and down. Now, Cody, I remember at one time in 2021, you thought you were recovered, like you hadn't had any symptoms for 3 months, and then you went for a run. You remember that?
Yes. I contacted you, right? Yeah. So last summer in 2021, so this is the thing, I was like very tentative about like exercising and doing normal. Even when I was starting to feel myself again, I was still being very stringent about intermittent fasting, not exercising, and just trying to take care of my body and let my body.
So you were being cautious.
I was being cautious, but I was getting to the point where I felt like, maybe I can start integrating the stuff back, because I didn't want to be one of those people who was like, I'm recovered, but now I'm like scared of everything. And like, I want, like, if I could live my life again, I wanted to live my life again. So yeah, there was a time where I started trying to like introduced some more foods and exercise again last August. And yeah, I had like a little flare up. And I think that flare up there was some chronic fatigue. It wasn't just, like I said, mostly the flare ups at that point were just like breathing, but that was, yeah, there was like I think there's like a migraine or some chronic fatigue. And it definitely seemed linked to usually I'm able to just like discern whether it's like a flare up or whether it's like I ate something or something, like it's not linked to long COVID.
So at this point, Cody, you sound pretty confident that, I mean, you were through the ringer. You had this long period where you were mostly recovered, but not fully recovered, had these minor flares. But now you think you're 100% recovered.
That's the thing. That's how I know I'm fully recovered now, because everything that I had done prior to long COVID, I've now integrated back into my life, and I've done enough times to know that it hasn't caused, like I've worked out multiple times now, like many times now this year. I drank my first alcohol from since before long COVID, after my dissertation defense, like this month, and I've been drinking. And yeah, I had nights where I got drunk with my friends, stayed out late.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. Actually, one of those late night drinking things, binges with your friends, that is another thing that can trigger long COVID.
Absolutely.
I've had people tell me that I was fine until I was drinking with my buddies. And
being able to do that, and especially like this, I've been on the road this past month, like visiting old friends, and my body, been very active and doing things that are exhausting for my body. No symptoms or whatever, completely fine. Yes, I consider myself fully recovered at this point, because like last year, like I said, last year for most of the year, I felt from March on relatively healthy, with the exception of these flare-ups we talk about every couple months. But I still wasn't like fully recovered in the sense that I was tentative. I wasn't like exercising. I wasn't really like living my life as it normally was. Whereas now I am.
Cody, I am just so happy for you. I can't tell you. This is like so positive, so encouraging.
I do want to tell people, like, look, I was extremely, like, I was hopeless, bro. I thought I was going to have chronic fatigue syndrome and brain fog my entire life. Like, I thought I had come to grips with like all my philosophy dreams were done. And I was just, this was my life. And I really, truly thought that. And it's remarkable how much your body can just heal itself, because my body felt broken. Like I felt like my lungs weren't working, and my brain couldn't think. I'm like, there's no way I can ever fully recover from this. Like phenomenologically, it doesn't feel like it, but your body can, it can recover, it can heal itself.
I agree. It has a phenomenal ability to heal itself. And, I think a lot of long haulers are losing hope, after fighting this for a year or 2 years. And, I think some people are gradually getting worse over time. It's scary as heck. So I'm so thankful that you have put this in the rear view mirror. So what are your thoughts about staying healthy? Like, how concerned are you about, reinfection? Because obviously, even though everyone's burned out, the pandemic is not over.
Well, I'm concerned for sure. So that's another interesting thing. I was starting to recover, we're talking about like March 2021. This was right around the time the vaccine came out and was available for the public. So I was like right when the vaccine was like available for me, I was starting to recover, and I was actually nervous about taking the vaccine, not because I'm an anti-vaxxer or anything like that, but specifically because of my long COVID and how it might either make that better, make it worse, or do nothing.
Right. Yeah, which was totally unknown territory, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just starting to recover. Is this by putting COVID in my body, is it gonna make it worse? And you can go down the rabbit hole on Reddit and find a post of a guy who says the vaccine made him so much worse for long haul, then another post of a person who says completely cured them. So I'm reading these posts, I'm like, I don't know what to do. I ended up getting the Pfizer vaccine. Yeah, I got the Pfizer vaccine. I got the boost this past winter, and it was fine. I think.
So you didn't have anything outside of a normal reaction to a flu shot?
Okay, so the first Pfizer shot, the side effects weren't that bad. It was 1 to 2 days, which was kind of what I was expecting. The second one destroyed me for 2 weeks. Yeah, the second one was very, very bad. And actually, I was very, very depressed about it at the time because I thought, oh my God, this just exacerbated my long haul. Like I'm back.
So your long haul symptoms came back worse.
Yeah, periodically, and also some new ones like that seemed to be just like, but most of the people I was talking to, my age that were getting the vaccine, most of them had side effects, but it was like a day or two. But for me, no, it like really destroyed me for like 2 weeks. And
Wow.
like a week and a half in, I'm like, fuck, I might have made like a huge mistake. But a couple of days later, I was able to just get back to my normal self. So it was fine. And then when I got the booster, the side effects were kind of what I was expecting. I think they were normal. It was like,
This was your second mRNA shot. It
yeah,
really had a major effect on you.
yes.
So this is very interesting because I have a degree in immunology, and I'm like been learning everything I can about the biology of the SARS-CoV-2 and put it in perspective of the immune system. The molecular biology says this virus is really good at hiding from our immune system by suppressing interferon, by suppressing autophagy. And when people get vaccinated, it's like does an end around. It's a way to stimulate our B and T cells to fight the virus. It removes the cloak of invisibility that the virus throws up at the cellular level. So that's my theory as to why you had such a bad reaction, because you still had some lingering virus, and all of a sudden your immune system was primed and activated by that second booster shot or second shot to go after the virus.
Yeah, that would make sense. That definitely makes sense. I mean, like, and another thing, like in addition to all of the, remedies that I've talked about, intermittent fasting, cutting out sugar, inflammation, staying hydrated, the vitamin supplementation, autophagy, just positive thinking, I think. And like, I don't know if, this is just a placebo or whether it actually can make a difference, but as hard as it can be, and again, I know there are tons of people dealing with this who I'm sure had it worse than I did and had symptoms that I didn't have, but not getting trapped into that catastrophizing mindset as I would all too often, not getting trapped into perceiving myself as now a chronically ill person, and really just committing to that narrative in myself, like trying to break out of that and saying, no, like this is, it's sporadic, it's gradual. It might take months or years, but I'm on my way to recovery, and that's what's happening, like.
That's great. And one of the unexpected benefits of people get when they join my group or probably other Facebook groups or other social media groups is they get new hope, right? And it's like, and they get a plan, a direction to go, and just having that hope, having that positivity is very beneficial. What else helped you have a more positive mindset?
Yeah, meditation, I'd say, have definitely helped me try to achieve some kind of like mental tranquility, especially because not that I'm an expert meditator or anything like that, but I have like a meditation app that I use. The ability to be mindfulness and the ability to recognize your thoughts as such, to recognize that most people are just identifying themselves with their thoughts. So what Buddhists will say, and like the illusion of the self comes out of like identifying yourself with your thoughts. But if you can kind of achieve this stance of mindfulness and just see your thoughts as these sensations that are arising, it's easier to discern different patterns of thinking that I've accumulated. And some of those patterns of thinking might be negative and catastrophizing, right? And once you can recognize those patterns, kind of like get out of that pattern of thinking, like see it from above almost mentally, and recognize it as such, you realize that in a lot of ways, your mentality can be your reality. And in a lot of ways, in addition to the pure physical symptoms that I was experiencing, so much of my suffering was just this added psychological suffering that I was imposing upon my own mind.
Yeah. I mean, this angst of like, gosh, I'm sick, I can't do anything. It's
Right.
not surprising. A lot of people end up in a dark place.
And it's hard, especially with the physical symptoms. I wish I could just like take someone who's like in like the darkness of long COVID, like the worst of it right now, and tell them like I was where you are. Like I didn't think I was going to get better, and I did. I know I feel like we're all like inevitably prisoners of the moment.
I want to, underscore how valuable meditation can be. When I was at my worst, I was a typical sick long hauler for a male. I would pull out my mindfulness app my favorite meditation. It was like a 20 or 22-minute meditation. And I would do that. And sometimes I would do that twice a day when I was at my worst and having insomnia and anxiety and stuff. And I have no clue how it works, but all I can say is that, wow, it makes a big difference. It really, really helps.
Well, one thing I noticed with it is just the connection between cognition and emotion. Like if I entertain particular patterns of thoughts, it's almost like an emotion, like if I have an anxiety triggering thought, an emotion of anxiety will almost inevitably come in the wake of that thought. It's like the cognition is giving the emotion fuel. And if you cut off the cognition, the emotion could stop, so just like, the virus might be having this physical toll on your body, but in some sense, like psychologically, it is always up to you in terms of how you conceptualize what's going on with you. And you can choose to conceptualize this as catastrophizing. This is the end of my life. I'm a chronically ill patient now. Or you can choose to conceptualize this as this is a challenge, and I know people have recovered from this, and I'm going to get better from this.
Right.
Again, like I don't know, I understand it's easier said than done, but it helped me just having this positive self-talk and trying to have control over my thoughts instead of letting my thoughts control me. Because when my thoughts control me, it can just send me down into, extremely dark psychological places that I don't necessarily need to be in. Like the physical symptoms are hard enough. Why am I having all this
It's not
unnecessary
productive.
psychological suffering?
We want to ease the burden as much as we can.
Yeah.
Because this truly is a long haul, and it's unbelievable pain and suffering and disruption of people's lives, people's relationships, people's work. I'm so thankful that you've taken the time today, Cody, to share your story. And it's just inspiring. It's just, it's just awesome. And, my goal is I haven't been able to autophagy my way completely out of my own long haul. I'm to very mild, relatively mild long COVID, but I'm still working on, figuring out ways to get past the viral cloak of invisibility and, hopefully get a lot more people fully recovered. Yeah, I think your story is just awesome and inspiring, Cody.
But thank you, Tom, for everything that you've done and for starting this group. I owe a huge, tremendous debt of gratitude to you. You're one of the people that helped me the most get out of this. And I really appreciate it. I really do. You're doing a great service with all the research that you're doing and all the advocacy that you're doing.
Thanks for your kind words, Cody. I mean, nobody knows the best way to treat this, and anyone that survives it and gets back to full health is a hero. So that's my perspective on it. You're the hero. Well, thanks for sharing your story, and stay safe, Cody. It's just awesome that you've gotten to where you are. You've totally resumed your life. You have so much ahead of you, and your life, if you'd been stuck in long COVID, would have been scary and totally different. So this is fantastic.
I feel extremely grateful. Thank you, Tom.